Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Friday, May 17th, 2024. Made it through another week. Is that a major accomplishment? I guess so. All right. Well, there's plenty to round up today. There's lots of news today. I kind of thought it would end up being a slow news day. But instead, I don't know. I guess it's not. And so we have plenty to catch up on. And, of course, lots of things that I sort of thought, I'll use the Friday lull to read you these incredible long-form stories, which I guess instead I'll just have to give you as assignments to read over the weekend if you... or perhaps we'll excerpt them. I really should spend more time excerpting these things. But, I like to be surprised and give you a genuine reaction. And also not to do a lot of work when I'm off the air. Okay, so anyway, lots to catch up on and lots of different directions to go in. And I don't even know, what to say is causing the buzz this morning. Part of the reason that I don't know what to say about it's causing the buzz is that, I don't know, some malfunction now, perhaps in Pocket, perhaps in Blue Sky, but about half the time when I mark something for inclusion in Pocket from my phone while reading Blue Sky, it just doesn't make it there, which is, too bad, because then I get to the show and I say, what was that thing that I thought was so interesting that I wanted to tell people about? And then there's no answer. And now I guess we've also got a malfunction in Pocket, which thinks it doesn't know what I've been marking. All right, some of them have showed up here. All right, well, let's see. The online world is buzzing about something that really doesn't matter a great deal to us for political reasons, but is an always interesting commentary. And it comes from the world of sports, so it's something. You know that people are talking about it, even though it doesn't really matter very much. As it happens, there's a lot happening in the world of sports. One thing that I am not probably going to talk about is that I guess the kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs is a bit of a reactionary a-hole or something, and I don't know. I guess has been running around. He gave a commencement speech somewhere, which, reevaluate things if you're getting your commencement speech from the place kicker from the Chiefs. The Chiefs won the Super Bowl and all, but and kicking is an essential part of the game. But hey, anyway, how about a physicist? I don't know, but all right. Anyway, apparently he gave some remarks, and they included at Benedictine College. And I saw some it's now becoming an interesting story, not because he said terrible things, which he did do. And I don't know, maybe he thought that he was in the right place for this, like a conservative-ish Catholic college, which, you're probably on safe ground. I don't know. I guess you used to be on safe ground saying maybe, I guess we could talk a little bit about the sanctity of life. Don't say, don't talk about it in terms of abortion. You're not always going to get a receptive audience anymore, but okay. Anyway, he decided that the best thing to tell them was essentially, from what I've gathered, seeing it in passing, that something along the lines of, what's really great and what God actually intended for everybody to do is for women to shut up and stay home. And, these are college graduates. And they probably, were banking on something completely different for their lives than being told to shut up and stay home by a place kicker. Anyway, he's gone on a great length about it. He's been on. It's not something he made up on the spot. And I did see some interesting reaction that the nuns at Benedictine College, I guess, got together and were like, you said that a woman's highest calling is to shut up and stay the hell home, and we don't. We got jobs. I guess that's true. Hello. You're speaking to a bunch of people who, are living the opposite. But okay. Anyway, he was up to that. I don't know that it matters a great deal. Apparently, it's become a political issue because Josh Hawley, I guess, is claiming that he's a good friend of this guy, which, he may or may not be. And there's a just a wild picture of the two of them discussing at some location or another how much of a cool bro the other one thinks the other one is. And I got to tell you, they are looking like not really, I don't know what to tell you. You remember the pictures not all that long ago of Josh Hawley that he circulated on his own volition of him kissing his wife, and neither of them are actually willing to, like, you know, position themselves such that there's an actual kiss going on. They're sort of like tight-lippedly rubbing their mustaches together or something. I don't know how else you would describe the thing. She's a lovely person. I mean, I don't know. Maybe not. Who knows? At any rate, Josh Hawley, close bro type buddies, he claims, with the place kicker, and both of them look a little polished. I'll say that. Anyway, that wasn't the news story that I was thinking of in sports. The sports story that's got everyone abuzz is the world's #1 golfer, which is a title that goes around every once in a while, changes hands quite often, like Al-Qaeda, #2 used to change hands all the time. But this one, more lucrative, less dangerous. Until today, I mean, still lucrative, but the world's #1 golfer has been arrested. And it wasn't like any kind of Tanya Harding plot to take him out either. The PGA champion, maybe it was. Where's my dramatic music? Now we're on to something. The story is of Scotty Scheffler. Is that how he says his name? I'm very old now. I don't even watch golf anymore. I'm too old to even watch golf. That's old. And I don't know who the world #1 golfer is anymore. And I live in the 1990s when the #1 golfers are now all on the senior tour. But anyway, he was arrested heading into the PGA Championship being held at Valhalla Golf Club. And I don't know what the story is exactly. I guess nobody knows. The reporting on the story is very anodyne that I've got. But NYC Southpaw has, I believe, the correct take here. But I guess he was trying to go into the club to, like get ready. He had like a 8 o'clock tea time, 8:30, so it's pre-dawn that he's going in. Those guys, they spend a lot of hours getting ready for their golf, Anyway, so he's on his way in, and I guess there's a cop in the road, and he's trying to go around the cop into what he thinks is the special entrance for very special people who are #1 golfers, etc. And the cop the cop is under the impression that this is not the entrance for very special golfers. And they disagreed about that. And I guess the golfer tries to drive around him, at which point the cop throws himself onto the car, I think, to stop him. At any rate, he's then arrested. He's like pulled out of the car, like most people would be if they tried to go around a cop. Pulled out of the car, allegedly slammed into the car, handcuffed behind the back, escorted away. And when I say like most people, I mean, okay, well, like most people would be stopped and probably roughly treated. Of course, certain other people would probably be beaten or possibly shot if that were the case. But he's escorted away. There was reporters all over the place, and a couple of them circulated video online of him being escorted away. They're following him, being taken to the squad car to be hauled away. And just as always, there's other cops barking at the reporter. Get away, back up. You need to back up. You're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to film. You're allowed to do all of that, but they will hit you over the head and then tell you 6 months later, I guess you were allowed to after all, but sorry about that. So, you got to make a trade-off in your mind about what you think your rights are and how much you want them to hurt, which is not great and maybe threatens the status of your rights entirely. But anyway, during the entirety of the filming, it sounds like the reporter is trying to maybe squeak out, hey, that's actually one of the golfers that you're arresting, as opposed to a random person trying to sneak into the golf course, I guess, to assassinate golfers or something. And he just doesn't manage to get that out, and it's not entirely clear that it would have mattered. At that point, the cops were definitely not going to admit that they had made any kind of mistake. As I said, NYC Southpaw had the looks like the correct take on it in describing this local story, which he's attached to his Blue Sky message about it. Kentucky police arrest and charge the world's #1 golfer with 4 offenses for trying to drive into the PGA tournament site against an officer's will. Yeah, and that's pretty much what it is. Cops decided this wasn't going to happen, so it's now not allowed to happen. There's a relatively brief report from WAVE TV, which I guess is a Louisville, Kentucky station. World number 1 golfer Scottie Scheffler released is the new news after being arrested by Louisville Metro Police. Let's see. I guess various WAVE staff and Michael Caldwell reporting on this one. And, there's a little nuance to it, but I don't want to spend a great deal of time on it. But apparently there was nearby, the only mitigating factor I can find in here is that there was right around this entrance to the club, there had been as it's reported here, a deadly pedestrian crash that had happened earlier in the morning. Scheffler was not involved in that crash, but there was a very heavy police presence, I suppose, heavier than usual because of that. And I don't know whether that caused any weird hypersensitivity about dangerous driving in the area. But at any rate, as the cops put it, I've seen various, reports about it. It's like he tries to go around the cop to get into the entrance, which probably as a professional golfer he's used to doing all the time. And this time it wasn't in the instructions. But the cop apparently throws himself on the hood of the car to stop him. And so now, of course, the driver, Scheffler, is charged with reckless driving, and it is reported here that a police officer needed to be treated for minor injuries after being dragged about 10 to 15 yards by the vehicle during this incident. But if you throw yourself on the hood and then, I don't know if it's fair to say you were being dragged. And 10 to 15 yards for a car, that's kind of like, oh my God, somebody is definitely trying to stop me. I will now hit the brakes, and that's really all it takes. Anyway, he was booked into the Louisville Metro Department of Corrections after being arrested on the following charges: second-degree assault of a police officer, which is a felony, but of course, again, I threw myself on the car. Ouch! I'm being assaulted. Third-degree criminal mischief, a misdemeanor, reckless driving, a motor vehicle violation, and disregarding traffic signals from an officer directing traffic, also a misdemeanor, but apparently some dispute about whether any signals were given whatsoever. And so there you go. What a way to start your day. So sports news for the morning. It's an appropriate thing for a weekend coming up, and I don't know, blah, 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 blah. Okay, let's see. What other things have we got for you? There's definitely actual news out there, but I thought, this is what people are yakking about this morning. So why not acknowledge it? But what about some more serious things that people are yakking about? Like, for instance, which one will I start with? How about Justice Alito? Why not? So you've likely heard about this one already, but it is important to note, and in case you didn't know why it mattered, there's an article that will explain it to you. So the New York Times had the initial story that I saw, and it is here at Justice Alito's house, in case you haven't heard this story yet, a Stop the Steal symbol on display. And that's the real issue here. Of course, he's sitting on the Supreme Court. They were allegedly supposed to decide these issues of how to manage the incredible claims being made by the wackos in the Trump camp about the 2020 election, and then afterwards, and does he have immunity, et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, what do you mean he's displaying a Stop the Steal symbol? Well, yes and no, and then back to yes again. An upside-down flag adopted by Trump supporters contesting the Biden victory flew over the justice's front lawn as the Supreme Court was considering an election case. So there's a lot of, nuance to be had about this. But essentially, I think in the end, it falls into you're supposed to know what will and won't create controversy. How about you don't create any while you have this lifetime appointment to the role of let's be neutral kind of guy. But, he gave up that role a long time ago. Jody Cantor does the work here for the New York Times and writes it up this way. After the 2020 presidential election, as some Trump supporters falsely claimed that President Biden had stolen the office, many of them displayed a startling symbol outside their homes, on their cars, and in online posts, an upside-down American flag. One of the homes flying an inverted flag during the time was the residence of Supreme Court Justice Samuel A. Alito Jr. in Alexandria, Virginia, according to photographs and interviews with neighbors. Why did it take 3+ years to find this out? It's addressed in the story, but the upside-down flag was aloft on January 17th, 2021, and likely beforehand, but this is when it was documented. President Donald J. Trump's supporters, including some brandishing the same symbol, and this was co-opted. There's a real use for the upside-down flag. I'm sure you know it. It's a distress signal, and but it was it's been adopted by lots of protest movements. But at that time, at that particular moment in time, it was chiefly in use by the pro-Trump demonstrators. So, let's see. So some of their supporters, some brandishing the same symbol, had rioted at the Capitol a little over a week before. Biden's inauguration was 3 days away at this point. Alarmed neighbors snapped photographs, some of which were recently obtained by the New York Times. Word of the flag filtered back to the court, of course. People who worked there said in interviews, while the flag was up, the court was still contending with whether to hear a 2020 election case, with Justice Alito, by the way, on the losing end of that decision. They opted not to hear it, but he was pushing for them to do so, and, displaying stop the steal signals at his house. In the coming weeks, the justices will rule on 2 climactic cases involving the storming of the Capitol on January 6th, including whether Trump has immunity for his actions. Their decisions will shape how accountable he can be held for trying to overturn the last presidential election and his chances for re-election in the upcoming one. And here, what does he do? What do all people do at this point? You throw somebody else under the bus. What does a guy like Alito do? Throw his wife under the bus. Watch this. I had no involvement whatsoever in the flying of the flag, Justice Alito said in an emailed statement to the Times. It was briefly placed by Mrs. Alito, which people were asking, are you talking about your mom, Mrs. Alito? Mrs. Alito, in response to a neighbor's use of objectionable and personally insulting language on yard signs, which is not a reason to be doing this. It doesn't make any sense. No one would ever connect the two things. You're flying your flag upside down. What the hell is that about? Oh, well, the guy across the street has an offensive sign. What? How about you put up a sign that at a minimum, how about a sign that says the gentleman across the streets has a sign which is offensive, and I'm taking the high road. No one would connect the two. So, no, that doesn't work that way. 2, blaming it on your wife. Hilarious. 3, I haven't seen anybody mention this one, but just from the super jingoistic, patriotic American standpoint, why in the world would one of the associate justices of the Supreme Court not have any involvement whatsoever in flying the flag outside his house? If you have a flagpole and you are a justice on the Supreme Court, you know, what do you mean? I have my people do that for me? What do you mean you have nothing to do with the flying the flag? Why not? What's wrong with you? I mean, that's a fairly serious question, actually. Whatever. You don't have to have it. I'm not like a flag nut or anything, and I guess you could have a flag. You buy a house that has a flagpole, whatever. You do use it, you don't use it, I don't care. I don't know whether he installed the flagpole, but if you're involved in a flag controversy, you should, in the end, have an established track record of proudly flying the flag and proudly being the one to raise it outside of your house. But he doesn't, because he's a lazy bum and a liar as well. Anyway, so we're reminded here that judicial experts said in interviews that the flag was a clear violation of ethics rules which seek to avoid even the appearance of bias and could sow doubt about Justice Alito's impartiality in cases related to the election and the Capitol riot. They have. The mere impression of political opinion can be a problem, the ethics experts said. This might be his spouse or someone else living in his home. I'd like to know who else, is there. Probably not the kids at this point. But he shouldn't have it in his yard as his message to the world, said Amanda Frost, a law professor at the University of Virginia, which is, actually some 100 miles hence. They couldn't find he's in Virginia. She's the University of Virginia. There are closer law schools, but a telephone obviates all of that. Anyway, this is the equivalent of putting a Stop the Steal sign in your yard, which is a problem if you're deciding election-related cases, she said. Interviews show that the justice's wife, she has a name, Martha Ann Alito, had been in a dispute with another family on the block over an anti-Trump sign on their lawn. But given the timing and the starkness of the symbol, the neighbors interpreted the inverted flag as a political statement by the couple, because it's stupid to think that an upside-down flag would be interpreted as a retort to, even a F Trump sign that's across the street. And it's interesting that the Justice Alito describes it as personally offensive. It's F Trump, not F Alito, but whatever. I don't like the F word, so I'm turning the flag upside down. Sure. Happens all the time. The long-standing ethics code for the lower courts, as well as the recent one adopted by the Supreme Court, wink, stresses the need for judges to remain independent and avoid political statements or opinions on matters that could come before them. You always want to be proactive about the appearance of impartiality. Jeremy Fogel, a former federal judge and the director of the Berkeley Judicial Institute, see, they all went all the way to Berkeley for this one, said in an interview, the best practice would be to make sure that nothing like that is in front of your house. Yes, easy to do. It's harder to actually go out there and fly the flag, right side up or not. You could just not have it. The court also has repeatedly warned its own employees against public displays of partisan views, according to guidelines circulated to the staff and reviewed by the Times. Displaying signs or bumper stickers is not permitted. Can't even do that, according to the court's internal rule book and a 2022 memo reiterating the ban on political activity. But that was 2 years later. Well, or 1 year later anyway. Asked if these rules also apply to justices, the court laughed in your face and sent you on your way. The exact duration that the flag flew outside the Alito residence is unclear. In an email from January 18th of that year, reviewed by the Times, a neighbor wrote to a relative that the flag had been upside down for several days at that point. In recent years, the quiet sanctuary of his street, with residents who are Republicans and Democrats, has tensed with conflict, neighbors said. Around the 2020 election, a family on the block displayed an anti-Trump sign with an expletive, and it apparently offended Mrs. Alito and led to an escalating clash between her and the family, according to interviews. But, to her, in her defense, how was she to know that there was a First Amendment right being exercised here? She's got no exposure to these things. Some residents have also bridled at the noise and intrusion brought by protesters. This is annoying, I'm sure, who started showing up outside the Alito residence in 2022 after the Supreme Court overturned the federal right to abortion. Other neighbors have joined the demonstrators, whose intent was to bring the protests to their personal lives because the decision affects our personal lives, said Heather Ann Irons, who came to the street to protest. A half dozen neighbors who saw the flag or knew of it requested anonymity because they said they did not want to add to the contentiousness on the block and feared reprisal. That's kind of where we are in the United States at this point. Last Saturday, May 11th, protesters returned to the street waving flags of their own, i.e., don't tread on my uterus. Well, it's not clever, but it's there. And using a megaphone to broadcast expletives, also not clever, at Justice Alito, who was in Ohio giving a commencement address. But whatever. So he wasn't going to listen to you anyway. Mrs. Alito appeared in a window complaining to the Supreme Court security detail outside. Turning the American flag upside down is, of course, a symbol of emergency and distress, first used as a military SOS. Historians said in interviews, in recent decades, it has increasingly been used as a political protest symbol, a controversial one, because the flag code and military tradition require the paramount symbol of the United States to be treated with respect. Over the years, Upside-down flags have been displayed by both the right and left as an outcry over a range of issues, including the Vietnam War, gun violence, the Supreme Court's overturning of the constitutional right to abortion, and in particular, election results. In 2012, Tea Party followers inverted flags at their homes to signal disgust at the re-election of President Barack Obama. 4 years later, some liberals advised doing the same after Mr. Trump was elected. And of course, they were probably pretty angry about that. During Mr. Trump's quest to win and then subvert the 2020 election, because he did not win it, the gesture took off as never before, becoming really established as a symbol of the Stop the Steal campaign, according to Alex Newhouse, a researcher at the University of Colorado, Boulder. The Rolodex is all over the country this morning. A flood of social media posts exhorted Trump supporters to flip over their flags or purchase new ones to display upside down. If January 6th rolls around and Biden is confirmed by the Electoral College, our nation is in distress, a poster wrote on patriots.win, a forum for Trump supporters, of course, garnering over 1,000 upvotes. If you cannot go to the D.C. rally, then you must do your duty and show your support for our president by flying the flag upside down. So I guess that idea may or may not have reached the Alito household. Local newspapers from Lexington, Kentucky to Sun City, Arizona to North Jersey wrote about the flags cropping up nearby. A few days before the inauguration, a Senate candidate in Minnesota flew an upside-down flag on a campaign vehicle. Hanging an inverted flag outside a home was an explicit signifier that you are part of this community that believes America has been taken and needs to be taken back, Mr. Newhouse said. This spring, the justices are already laboring under suspicion by many Americans that whatever decisions they make about the January 6 cases will be partisan. Justice Clarence Thomas has declined to recuse himself despite the direct involvement of his wife, Virginia Thomas, in efforts to overturn the election. You all know about that. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. There's just a tiny little bit left about this story. We'll read through the rest of it, and then we'll find out why it all matters. Yes, we've been offered that opportunity. So let's see. Just 2 paragraphs remain here. We're still talking about Alito flying the flag upside down outside of his house right after January 6th, 2021. Now, of course, with decisions in the January 6 cases expected in just a few weeks, a similar debate may unfurl, flag reference there, about Justice Alito. The ethics experts said it really is a question of appearances and the potential impact on public confidence in the court. Mr. Fogel said, I think it would be better for the court if he weren't involved in the cases arising from the 2020 election, but I'm pretty certain that he will see that differently. If Justice Alito were on another court, Mr. Fogel said, the flag could also trigger some sort of review to determine if there was any misconduct. But because the Supreme Court serves as the arbiter of its own behavior, you don't really have anywhere to take it, he said. And that's the upshot of it. There you go. That's certainly true. And, it's problematic when we give the public reason to mistrust our most important institutions and undermine our own democracy. And it's one of those weird parallels we have. There's lots of that going on these days. Here and around the world, really, truly. There is an awful lot. And let's see if we can't skip around and touch on a couple of those other things. I want to at least acknowledge that there is an article out here. It's from everybody's good friend Steve Bannon over at the Maddow blog at MSNBC, adopting one of my least favorite constructions of headline. But now I'm curious to see whether we missed anything here. Why Justice Samuel Alito's upside down flag controversy matters. I mean, I think we know, but I'm curious to find out if we missed anything. And the subheader hints at something, a somewhat deeper analysis, and Steve's usually pretty good at that. Justice Samuel Alito doesn't exactly have a deep reservoir of credibility that he can turn to in response to the latest in a series of controversies. Okay, that's a good point. It was nearly 24 hours ago when the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a ruling in a closely watched case. Some far-right corporate interests had launched a rather outlandish case, this should be on our radar too, targeting the Consumer Protection Financial Bureau and the increasingly radical Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which had sided with the plaintiffs. Would the nation's highest court go along with the transparently nonsensical foolishness, which, long story short, really short, was, I guess, some of the companies that had been gotten themselves in trouble with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, for whatever reason, and you may already know, basically said, well, what if all of those problems went away because the CFPB was unconstitutional? Like, they did the wrong constitution thing when they formed it, so therefore we don't have to follow any of its rules. That was the essence of the claim here. Now, fortunately, back to Steve Bannon, no, they didn't do the worst possible thing. In CFPB versus Community Financial Services Association, the justices, including most of the dominant conservative faction, sided with the agency and its funding structure, noting that Justice Clarence Thomas wrote the decision. Slate's Mark Joseph Stern's piece appeared under a headline that read, "Even Clarence Thomas can see that the Fifth Circuit is just making up nonsense." My MSNBC colleague Jordan Rubin added, "It's a sign that your legal theory is too extreme when Justice Clarence Thomas leads a lopsided majority in rejecting it." The decision was not unanimous, even though it should have been. As ridiculous as this case was, and as absurd as the appellate court's ruling was, Justice Samuel Alito was one of just two justices to rule against the CFPB, and it was a timely reminder of just how radical a jurist he is. That's how yesterday started. As the day ended, the New York Times had published the report that we just read about the flag. In case this isn't obvious, January 17th, 2021 was just 11 days after the Trump-inspired attack on the U.S. Capitol, featuring insurrectionist rioters carrying the same flag that flew at Alito's home, and just 3 days before Joe Biden's presidential inauguration. That, of course, is obvious because we read the entirety of the Times piece. When I first saw the images, Steve says, I was initially skeptical. Maybe the photos had been manipulated. Maybe they were AI generated. Maybe there was a prank and some activists had hoisted the flag at Alito's home in order to make him look bad. But that's not what happened. Rather, the photographs were real and legitimate. The Times report added, while the flag was up, the court was still contending with whether to hear a 2020 election case with Justice Alito on the losing end of that decision. By way of an explanation, the justice pinned it on his wife, of course, and Alito did not disavow the upside-down flag or deny its significance. He did, however, blame his wife, which is every bit as unpersuasive as it seems. The Times report added that, it's a clear violation of ethics rules, et cetera, but there's nothing you can do because Supreme Court. Let's see. Stepping back, there are a couple of related angles to keep in mind, Steve tells us. First is that Alito doesn't exactly have that deep reservoir of credibility that he can turn to in response to a controversy like this one. We are, after all, talking about a sitting justice who has earned a reputation as the High Court's most unyielding ideologue. who has delivered a series of overtly political speeches, who's issued public endorsements of a conservative advocacy group's work, who thought it would be a good idea to defend the Supreme Court's integrity at a pro-Trump organization exactly 2 weeks before the 2022 midterm elections, who's appeared a bit too cozy with Wall Street Journal's editorial page, and who's declared his indifference to congressional oversight in ways that were panned as stunningly wrong, for instance, that being a quote. And of course, he was the guy who shook his head and said no, 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 mouthed no, no, no during Barack Obama's State of the Union address, in which he said that Citizens United would create a world of dark money slush funds manipulating our politics. Not true, not true. No, actually was true. Anyway, do I remember that correctly? I think so. Well, these latest revelations, in other words, are gross on their face, but they're even more offensive given the larger pattern of highly dubious conduct. But the other angle of note is the challenge facing Supreme Court Justice John Roberts. From a distance, it's largely easy to believe that the conservative justice genuinely cares about the High Court as an institution. Roberts no doubt wants the public to trust and respect the Supreme Court. He expects the public to look to the court as a neutral arbiter that Americans can count on, to be fair. With this in mind, it's important to realize that the Chief Justice has some important work to do. Ethics scandals, leaked rulings, a deteriorating public image, radical and unpopular decisions, growing assumptions that the justices are partisans who pick a preferred conclusion and then work backwards to justify it. Alito's latest controversy, the latest in a series, makes an ugly situation worse. If Roberts doesn't realize that he needs to get his house in order, he's making a terrible mistake. Probably true. All right. And yes, some additional helpful context to all of that. And, well, gosh, there's an awful lot to get to. And, man, I don't even know. Can we touch on all of these things? I'll recommend this for reading over the weekend, I guess, rather than reading it now. Over at the American Prospect, what do we say? Always a good idea to be reading David Dayen. And he has made himself something of an expert in the CFPB. So it would be a great idea to catch up on the ruling and what it means by having a look at his article, even if we don't read it in its entirety. I'll give you a hint, though. It made me park the article in pocket. The CFPB ruling strikes a blow for governing. What does this mean? Instead of giving into cynicism, Congress created an agency to protect consumers, like for the first time in a million years here. The Supreme Court declined to overrule it. This is interesting and valuable and meaningful. Let me just, if I start reading the thing, I'm going to be tempted to read the whole thing. And it's not even overly long. Okay. You might not be focused on this. You might be focused on the other headline. So maybe this adds some real value to just give David's opinion here. There's an old line from The Simpsons, and that always means it's relevant, that I think accurately summarizes some of the more pernicious approaches to politics these days. Let's see if I remember it. Yes. Kids, Homer says to Bart and Lisa, you tried your best, and you failed miserably. The lesson is, never try. Yeah, okay, I remember that one. Certainly, there are some days in politics when it's tempting to lean in that direction. Virulently conservative courts routinely take laws passed by Democratic Congresses or agency rules to proceed from those laws promulgated by Democrats and nullify them based on their own ideological preferences. With the fig leaf of some invented doctrine, originalism, limply covering those courts' real motivations. And if not originalism, then the major questions doctrine or some other made-up crap. Independent state legislature theory, what have you. In those moments, never try can sound positively reasonable, but that would give no purpose to politics at all and rob the nation of the progress that can penetrate the judicial wall. The Supreme Court's ruling on Thursday upholding the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's funding mechanism, written by none other than Justice Clarence Thomas, is a good example. The doomerist position on the CFPB would be that any new-sounding agency will invariably be tossed out by small c and big C conservative justices, and the energy expended on defending it would be better put to use elsewhere. Maybe the focus could be on winning elections to get a better balance of judges, or changing the rules for the judiciary, or homing in on states with Democratic control that would be more receptive to aggressive consumer protection. That was not warranted in this case because the policymakers who created the CFPB decided they would not think several years ahead about the legal implications and talk themselves out of action. Millions of consumers have recovered more than $20 billion from financial scams as the agency has survived one court challenge after another. Tens of billions of dollars more are on the way to the public through agency rulemaking that will limit financial extraction. Consumers won because in 2010, the 111th Congress just went ahead and created an agency that would put the public interest ahead of business interest. The 110th Congress, is that right? 111th Congress? I don't think so. By the way, I think that's wrong. I mean, that really doesn't matter very much, but I would think, is that right? Yeah. Okay. Oh, all right. Okay. For some reason, I was thinking it would be 113th through 15th, but apparently so. I've missed a decade of Congresses somewhere along the way. Okay. Well, David Dayen is usually right, and he probably wouldn't have added that without looking it up. So, okay. Now I've looked it up, and we've both looked it up. Yes, the 111th Congress. Well, at any rate, they just went ahead and created an agency that would put the public interest ahead of business interests. That's great. And they even knew what Congress it was. The antidote to cynicism, in other words, is governing and looking things up. The CFPB's effectiveness is inherently tied to its structure. It's not funded by congressional appropriators beholden to special interests. It gets its budget from the Federal Reserve, which used to handle consumer protection functions, by the way, but I guess jettisoned that at some point. The CFPB asks for how much it deems necessary to enforce the laws it oversees, capped by Congress at an inflation-adjusted level. This enables the CFPB to be uncorrupted and bold, not looking over its shoulder for how its actions might affect the interests of appropriators. Such a funding structure, the Supreme Court ruled on Thursday, is totally normal and within bounds of how appropriations have been conducted since the founding of the country. Originalists. About 60% of the federal budget is appropriated without a specific congressional dollar amount determined, including the agency budgets of several financial regulators. I don't know that Justice Thomas had to go back to battles between the British Parliament and the monarch, or consult multiple dictionary entries to reach the conclusion that this is legal, but that's what he did, knocking down the arguments of the payday lender trade group that brought the case. The ruling should have an immediate effect. The notoriously right-wing Fifth Circuit claimed that the CFPB's funding structure was unconstitutional, and then lower courts across the country then put stays on at least 10 enforcement cases while the constitutionality of the agency was being adjudicated, which they really shouldn't have done unless they were in the Fifth Circuit, but okay. In addition, a Texas court issued a preliminary injunction preventing the CFPB's new rule capping credit card late fees to $8 from going into effect, entirely because of that Fifth Circuit opinion, and they are in the Fifth Circuit, at least Texas. Now that the court has struck down the Fifth Circuit, the late fee rule should be allowed to go forward, and those other enforcement cases against check cashing operations, predatory lenders, debt collectors, and more should be resolved, with the agency allowed to do its work enforcing consumer protection laws. Now that the CFPB's funding structure is settled law, every lawsuit clogging up courtrooms with challenges to the agency's enforcement authority and cost-lowering rules hinging on the outcome of the predatory lender's case must be immediately tossed out, said Caroline Ciccone, president of Accountable.us, a corporate watchdog. The legal system must allow the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to fully do its job, protecting consumers and lowering costs. We'll see whether that happens. And conservatives in Congress should finally get over their obsession with letting Wall Street prey on Main Street to make a quick buck. Well, they won't get over it all that quickly, but they should. CFPB's legal odyssey exposed the radical Fifth Circuit and the financial ghouls who brought the case as wildly out of step with the laws and beliefs of the country. The Supreme Court's 7-2 ruling punctures the credibility of a circuit court that has become the de facto decision maker for so much of our financial and economic lives because business interests opportunistically file their cases within that jurisdiction to ensure that their case will come before the ideologues who sit there. Even those rock-ribbed conservatives on the Supreme Court find the Fifth Circuit to be legally deficient, and each bonkers theory that the circuit puts forward makes them even more suspect. The Supreme Court's stance was telegraphed at oral arguments when justices across the political spectrum questioned the Fifth Circuit's claim that Congress created a perpetual funding mechanism that it had no power to alter. Congress can change any law at any time, Brett Kavanaugh pointed out. You're just flying in the face of 250 years of history, Justice Elena Kagan said. If you get your views on politics from certain corners of the internet, you'd have probably concluded that CFPB was a dead agency from the moment it was established 14 years ago. Nobody in such a corrupt country would allow something that only tried to prevent consumer ripoffs to exist. These are not only the thoughts of political nihilists, but Wall Street itself. It's what they try to implant into the heads of every policymaker, telling them that their impulses to help people will be fought, challenged, and ultimately shredded. That shouldn't dull public servants into complacency. There's work to do in America, and the public, particularly the voting public, won't tolerate stories about how policy actions are too complicated and too prone to failure to make the attempt. The Day One Agenda series we did 5 years ago over at the American Prospect was predicated on the idea that there are real options for governing if those empowered decide to take them. We were told John Roberts would strike them all down. He has done so a couple of times and may yet do so again, but shrinking from action because one rogue branch might not allow Congress or the president to act would be an abdication of the office. And if you take enough shots on goal, you eventually get important ones through. In fact, as Graham Steele, a former Senate staffer and Biden Treasury Department official, wrote in one of the first pieces on our Day One Agenda series, policymakers should actually welcome these fights. Each loss clarifies which side our representatives are on, and each victory would put us on a path toward a more just and equitable financial system. In American politics, there are too many excuses made to do nothing. Contra Homer Simpson, the only way forward is to try, and sometimes you can even win. Larger point being made there. So thanks to David for doing so, and thanks to me for realizing that we ought to include it in our roundup. But no thanks to my computer for not going back to Pocket. Okay, many more directions to go in and many more parallels out there. I don't know. I'm gonna shift gears, but still, I think filling in a larger picture here. I gotta touch on this one. From the Texas Tribune comes this astonishing story. And I say I'm reading all of these things in the context of the story I mentioned to you yesterday in the New York Times Magazine on the Unpunished, the story of the West Bank settlers and how, as they put it, extremists have taken over Israel. Very important reading, very long reading. If you haven't read it, I recommend it over the weekend. And if you want something shorter, there's another piece I put aside, the takeaways from the article, the series. I guess there's more to come yet, but a shorter version that we can perhaps share. And maybe I ought to look at this before I look at the Texas Tribune story, because I really think that the Texas Tribune story needs to be read in the context of the Israel story, which is hard to understand perhaps at first, but if you get the story of Israel, what you're looking at is a preview of America, essentially. They're operating a couple of years ahead of us in the break with democracy. As I kind of was hinting at on social media yesterday, it's very easy if you substitute Palestinians for immigrants and outlawed Israeli political parties and unofficial militias among the settlers for our own not yet outlawed but unofficial militias here in the United States. It's easy to see the parallels. So maybe we'll just make it explicit, and we'll get to the Texas story after the break, and I'll give you the takeaways from the Times investigation into the unpunished, their big magazine piece that I was reading yesterday. Radical forces in Israeli society, it says in the subheader, have moved from the fringes to the mainstream and put Israel's democracy in peril. Here are the takeaways from our investigation. And do you recognize the trend here in the United States, moving from the fringes to the mainstream? Ronan Bergman and Mark Mazzetti are the writers on this, and I presume that's because they're the writers on the big magazine piece as well. For decades, most Israelis have considered Palestinian terrorism the country's biggest security concern. But there is another threat that may be even more destabilizing for Israel's future as a democracy: Jewish terrorism and violence, and the failure to enforce the law against it. Our years-long investigation reveals how violent factions within the Israeli settler movement, protected and sometimes abetted by the government, have come to pose a grave threat to Palestinians in the occupied territories and to the state of Israel itself. Piecing together new documents, videos, and over 100 interviews, we found a government shaken by an internal war, burying reports that it commissioned, neutering investigations it assigned, and silencing whistleblowers, some of them senior officials. It is a blunt account, told in some cases for the first time by Israeli officials, of how the occupation came to threaten the integrity of the country's democracy. First section here sums up an awful lot of it in the section title. Settlers pursuing a theocratic state have become lawmakers. Where have we seen that before? Officials told us that once fringe, sometimes criminal, groups of settlers bent on pursuing a theocratic state have been allowed for decades to operate with few restraints. Since Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government came to power in 2022, elements of that faction have taken power, driving the country's policies, including the war in Gaza. The lawbreakers have become the law. What did we just read just the other day? That West Virginia I don't know how narrowly, but did in fact just have the sense to avoid nominating for Congress someone who has already been convicted and served their time for January 6th rioting, and they're not the first January 6th rioter to run for high office either. But here in Israel, Bezalel Smotrich, if I have the pronunciation of the first name correct, the finance minister and the official in Netanyahu's government with oversight over the West Bank, was arrested in 2005 by the Shin Bet Domestic Security Service for plotting road blockages to halt the Israeli withdrawal at that time from Gaza. He was released with no charges. Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's national security minister, has been convicted multiple times for supporting terrorist organizations and, in front of television cameras in 1995, vaguely threatened the life of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who was, in fact, murdered weeks later by an Israeli student. Fuller expositions of all of this and lots of detail about the stories. Very much worth your time in reading the larger piece. Settler violence has been protected and abetted for decades, says the next section. All West Bank settlers are in theory subject to the same military law that applies to Palestinian residents. But in practice, they are treated according to the civil law of the State of Israel, which formally applies only to territory within the state's borders. So this is an error to begin with, but also favoritism. This means that Shin Bet might probe two similar acts of terrorism in the West Bank, one committed by Jewish settlers and one committed by Palestinians, and use wholly different investigative tools. And that's putting it mildly. The job of investigating Jewish terrorism falls to a division in Shin Bet known commonly as the Jewish Department. But it is dwarfed both in size and prestige by the Arab Department, the division charged mostly with combating Palestinian terrorism. Jews involved in terror attacks against Arabs over the past decades have received substantial leniency, which has included reductions in prison time, if there were any at all, anemic investigations, and pardons. Remember that one, pardons. Most incidents of settler violence, torching vehicles, cutting down olive groves, fall under the jurisdiction of the police, who tend to ignore them. When the Jewish Department investigates, more serious terrorist threats, it's often stymied from the outset, and even its successes have sometimes been undermined by judges and politicians sympathetic to the settler cause. The two-tier situation has only become worse during the past year. We scrutinized a sample of 36 cases from the West Bank since October 7th. 36 cases since then that show how much the legal system has decayed. In cases ranging from stealing livestock to arson to violent assault, not a single suspect was charged with a crime. In one case, a settler shot a Palestinian in the stomach while an Israeli Defense Forces soldier looked on. Yet the police questioned the shooter for only 20 minutes and never as a criminal suspect. Ami Ayalon, the head of Shin Bet in the 1990s, late 90s, told us that government leaders signal to the Shin Bet that if a Jew is killed, that's terrible. If an Arab is killed, that's not good, but it's not the end of the world. But Jews have also been targets of ultranationalists as well. Prime Minister Rabin was murdered after rabbis passed what amounted to a death sentence on him for his support of the Oslo peace process. Oslo, for our Norwegian listeners. Critics have been silenced and investigations buried. That's the next section. In 1981, this has been going on for quite a while, after a group of professors in Jerusalem raised concern about possible collusion between the settlers and the authorities and illegal private policing activity against Palestinians, militias, in the occupied territories, Judith Karp, then Israel's Deputy Attorney General for Special Duties, was asked to lead a committee to look into the issue. Their report found case after case of trespassing, extortion, assault, and murder, even as the military authorities and the police did nothing or performed notional investigations that went nowhere. The Minister of the Interior at the time responded to their report with a scolding. I understood that he wanted us to drop it, Karp told us. Another report, 2 decades later, met a similar fate. Talia Sasson, S-A-S-S-O-N, Sasson, who was tapped to draw up a legal opinion on the unauthorized outposts, as they were calling them, found that in a span of just over 3 years, the Construction and Housing Ministry had issued dozens of illegal contracts in the West Bank. In some cases, the ministry even paid for their construction. Why? Sasson and her Justice Ministry colleagues called the separate laws under which they saw the West Bank being administered utterly insane. The report had little impact, powerless against the machine in place to expand settlements. All right, well, we'll be fading out in just a few seconds, so we'll stop here and we'll read on with the summary of the big New York Times Magazine piece after this. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We never left. We were just waiting our turn. All right, I want to get back to this interesting summary. As I'm reading it, having read the article, I'm like, I just want you to have all this other detail that makes the whole thing that much more real and that much more dire. But it's extraordinarily long, and you really should read it on your own time so that you can take appropriate breaks and absorb the whole thing. But I think it's important to view this in parallel with all the things happening here in the United States, and I'll try and draw those parallels. But first, this just has to be part of the base understanding, I think. Next up, security officials are speaking out in alarm. In the West Bank, a new generation of ultranationalists has taken an even more radical turn against the very notion of a democratic Israeli state. This is actually super important in the current context of our protests here in the United States. It's an interesting angle on the question of the propriety of targeting Zionism or Zionists and of the emergence of a movement of as Palestinian sympathetic Jewish protesters are terming themselves being anti-Zionist. You know, anti-Zionism exists across the spectrum. I guess this helps you understand, like, if you were resistant at all to my entreaties that you be open to the possibility that Zionism may mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and it's not hard to believe that. If maybe we prove it by using the negative. Anti-Zionism apparently means different things to different people as well. And that's not hard to believe either. I mean, on the one hand, you would think, well, there's I guess you would call it the more radical anti-Zionism that is displayed by some Palestinians themselves and Palestinian supporters, which extends to, even to the Hamas ideology of the elimination of the state of Israel from a Palestinian perspective. Liberating the Palestinian people to occupy this territory as Palestine. And when I say occupy this territory, I mean live their lives freely as an independent nation in this territory. There's also leftist anti-Zionist Jewish thought, which is, well, if you want to live in the Holy Land as Jews, go ahead, but that doesn't mean you have to have sovereignty over the territory, especially if you're a minority in the territory. And then there's ultra-right-wing anti-Zionism of a sort, or at least anti-Israel, actually, anti-state of Israel sentiment, which is briefly described here, but is described in more detail in the magazine story. But just be aware that there is such a thing, and that I guess it's not necessarily clarifying enough as a leftist of any stripe that you declare yourself in opposition to the existence of the state of Israel. That doesn't necessarily default to pro-Palestinian in the minds of the ultra-right Israelis. This is really amazing. But here in this brief description, in the West Bank, a new generation of ultranationalists has taken an even more radical turn against the very notion of a democratic Israeli state. Essentially, they're saying, oh, we'll have a Jewish state, all right. It just won't be democratic. And it won't be a modern, a member nation of the United Nations sort of vision of Israel either. We should do the whole biblical thing. That's pretty weird and scary, but I mean, we do have that here in the United States, Their objective, it says here, is to tear down Israel's institutions. Uh-oh. Do we have that going on? And to establish Jewish rule. Not Christian rule, as we have here in the United States, but Jewish rule. Anointing a king. Actually, a king of Israel. Building a temple, a restoration of the actual ancient temple in the place of the Jerusalem mosques, of course, and sacred to Muslims worldwide, the Dome of the Rock, etc., imposing a religious regime on all Jews, but probably worldwide as well. In other words, as they've always envisioned it for themselves, allowing themselves to be the arbiter of who is and isn't Jewish properly. It was always clear, Lior Ackerman, a former Shin Bet official, told us that those wild groups would move from bullying Arabs to damaging property and trees, and eventually would murder people. And guess what? They did, and very early on at that. But it's happening now as well. This past October, according to a classified document we saw at the Times, Major General Yehuda Fox, the head of Israel's Central Command, responsible for the West Bank, wrote a letter to his boss, the chief of Israel's military staff, saying that the surge of Jewish terrorism and violence carried out in revenge for the October 7th attacks could set the West Bank on fire. And that is, of course, exactly what some of those extremists want. Another document describes a meeting in March when Fox wrote that since Smotrich took office, the efforts to clamp down on illegal settlement construction has dwindled to the point where it has disappeared. Gaza has refocused the world's attention on Israel's long inability to address the question of Palestinian autonomy, but it is in the West Bank, in the hands of emboldened settlers, some of whom are now in power, that the corrosive effects of the occupation on both Palestinians and Israel's rule of law are most apparent. And I really would recommend that you take a good look at a portion of the longer magazine article, which is toward the end, as I recall, in which they really lay out the case for ultra-right, ultra-nationalist, Jewish Israeli destruction of the state of Israel, which, like, hey, I thought only the most radical Palestinians and supporters were in support of that. And I mean, in the Western world, it's just strictly taboo. But there are, I mean, Hamas has made no secret of it, clearly. There are terrorist organizations among the Palestinians that actually actively seek that. What's amazing is that there are ultra-right nationalist Jewish groups, the same, that say we should just, that are essentially anarchist. We should live here under the rule of might makes right, and the only might that should be legal is Jewish might, and we should drive all Arabs from all of this territory, because God will reward us for it. How do you do battle with that? Well, it's a very long piece, very much worth your time. Can't recommend it enough. It's extremely important. And by the way, if you would like to see, I'll make a recommendation for you. If you would like to see a dramatic interpretation of real events that illustrate this perfectly. And if you look at the photos in the piece and you look at the pictures of the people involved, the casting could not be more obvious to draw parallels here. But anyway, but these are also about real events. HBO did a series a couple of years ago called Our Boys. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen it, but I recommend it to you. And it's actually, well, like I said, it's based on historical events, as I recall. But at any rate, it very clearly demonstrates some of this weird messianic zeal that drives a lot of the settler mindset. And you should also keep in mind that, again, over in, older established Israel, though, if you're Palestinian and you're bent and or sympathetic in your thinking, it doesn't make any difference. But among what we might consider to be normie Israeli society, quite a few of them, even right-wing or relatively right-wing Israelis, view the settlers as lunatics and out of control. But I don't know. The article does a great job in not in laying that out per se, but that is something to keep in mind. But does a great job in sort of showing how coalitional politics and the drive for Netanyahu to stay in power so that he's not prosecuted for his corruption makes it possible to sort of hold the door open in ways that, like, normie Israelis are throwing their hands up. What can we do? There's nothing we can do. And also, we don't care a great deal. Yes, the settlers are lunatics, but it's happening over there, and it's happening to Palestinians, and it's wrong, and it's sort of happening kind of in my name, but they also are pretty clear about it not being in my name because they don't want to have anything to do with me and the secular state of Israel. It's very interesting, and you ought to read through it. The reason I think it's important for American politics is that you will also have picked up the internet today and unfolded it and read it at breakfast to find stories like this one, where Governor Greg Abbott of Texas has now pardoned one Daniel Perry, a veteran, they point out, though that doesn't really matter very much, who killed a police brutality protester, a Black Lives Matter protester, in 2020. A Travis County jury sentenced Perry to 25 years in prison, prompting Abbott to ask the state parole board to review his case. And I guess I've gotten some of the timeline in my brief glances at this thing versus in social media. I've gotten some of the timeline wrong as well. It says here in the subheader that Perry was sentenced to prison last year. I got the impression that the day the sentence was handed down, the pardon came through. That doesn't matter a great deal. You should not be considering a pardon in this case at all. But I thought it was rather odd and just that much more egregious that the pardon would come down so quickly after the sentencing. But it didn't. So, okay, let's read and correct all the misperceptions that I managed to gather in hearing about this case via social media. William Melhado has written this up for the Texas Tribune, just yesterday. And here's the story. More than a year after the Travis County jury convicted Daniel Perry of murdering a protester in Austin, Governor Greg Abbott pardoned Perry, now 37, on Thursday, shortly after the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles recommended a full pardon. You know, the Texas system works a little bit differently. A Texas State District Court judge sentenced Perry in May of 2023 to 25 years in prison for shooting and killing U.S. Air Force veteran Garrett Foster during a 2020 demonstration protesting police brutality against people of color. It's interesting that they write around it as BLM, which might be wise at this point, although it concedes, perhaps arguably concedes too much ground. But for any conservative readers who might automatically be triggered, BLM protester, well, then he deserved it. We'll try and test that notion. And also, by the way, there was a big messaging from Abbott, like we should be honoring the service of Perry, who is a former Marine, and of course the Marines love to say no such thing as a former Marine, but he was a veteran, and we should be honoring his service, not putting him in prison. But the guy he killed was a veteran too, and hardly anybody's mentioning that. But the Texas Tribune going out of their way to make sure you know that. One day after, here's why the timeline confusion. One day after a jury convicted Perry, Abbott at that point directed the parole board to review the former U.S. Army sergeant's case. I thought that someone said he was a Marine, or that maybe made it sound more patriotic somehow. You know how we fetishize these things. Anyway, so right after the sentence was handed down, Abbott made it clear what he wanted to do. It was that the parole board took a year to come around to, I guess, making its recommendation, or at least took some time to come around, and then Abbott took some time perhaps to pull the trigger on the thing. But okay, that accounts for the strange displacement of the facts in my head here. Among the voluminous files reviewed by the board, they considered information provided by the Travis County District Attorney, the full investigative report on Daniel Perry, plus a review of all the testimony provided at trial, Abbott said in a statement announcing the proclamation that absolved Perry. Texas has one of the strongest stand-your-ground laws of self-defense that cannot be nullified by a jury or a progressive district attorney. Sure, it can be. They can absolutely consider that defense and reject it, which is what they did. And of course, the full facts, it seems, of this case makes it ridiculous to even be considering it as a stand-your-ground case in the first place. Abbott approved the board's recommendation, which included the restoration of Perry's firearm rights. Terrific. Whitney Mitchell, Foster's common-law wife, said that she had expected to grow old with Foster before Perry murdered him, of course. In a Thursday statement, she said Abbott's pardon made Texans less safe. Daniel Perry texted his friends about plans to murder a protester that he disagreed with. That's why he got 25 years for it. After a lengthy trial with an abundance of evidence, 12 impartial Texans determined that he carried out that plan and murdered my Garrett, Mitchell said. With this pardon, the governor has desecrated the life of a murdered Texan and U.S. Air Force veteran and impugned that jury's just verdict. He has declared that Texans who hold political views different from his and different from those in power can be killed in this state with impunity. And this, again, disturbing parallels to the story we read out of Israel. Travis County District Attorney Jose Garza echoed Mitchell's message about the governor prioritizing some lives over others. The board and the governor have put their politics over justice and made a mockery of our legal system. They should be ashamed of themselves, Garza said in a statement. They have sent the message that the service of the Travis County community members who served on the grand jury and the trial jury does not matter. Doug O'Connell, Perry's lawyer, thanked Abbott on Thursday for pardoning his client. He also thanked the board for investigating what he said was an illegal threat by Foster that led to the incident on Congress Avenue in Austin. Daniel Perry was imprisoned for 372 days and lost the military career that he loved, O'Connell said in a statement. We intend to fight to get Daniel's military service characterization upgraded to an honorable discharge. He loved his military service enough that he was working as an Uber driver that day, by the way. In a Thursday statement, and that too has another side to it, why we should be paying these people who serve in our military more, and they should be able to make a livable wage out of it. But anyway, in a Thursday statement, the parole board said it delved into the intricacies of Perry's case by reviewing documents, which is kind of what a jury does, but documents, police reports, court records, witness statements, and interviews of individuals linked to the case. The board did not elaborate on why it issued a full pardon. The members of the 7-person board are appointed by Abbott. That's why they issued the full pardon. Perry was driving for Uber at the time that he encountered protesters a few blocks from the Capitol in downtown Austin. Was he on, reserve status at that point? Do you have nothing whatsoever to do with the Army at that point? Just wanted to depend on his being a veteran to let him off the hook? I don't know. But driving for Uber when he encountered protesters a few blocks from the Capitol in downtown Austin. He stopped his car, and remember, he had texted earlier with friends, I'm going to murder a protester. You can do that now. Remember all the talk going around at the time, we should make it legal for you to run. They were blocking the streets at the time, the protesters. We should make it legal for you to be able to run them over with your car. Should we? Should we really? Well, he thought it was. And look, it is now legal to do that. It is. It just is. He stopped his car and honked at protesters as they walked through the street. Seconds later, he drove his car into the crowd, Austin police said. Foster was openly carrying an AK-47 rifle at the time and didn't say because he was dead. And during the trial, each side presented conflicting accounts as to whether the protester raised the gun to Perry, who was also legally armed. Perry shot Foster and then fled the area because of how he was standing his ground and was so sure that he was right. Police said he then called police and reported what happened, claiming he shot in self-defense after Foster aimed his weapon at him, which, if he did that at all, he probably did because he had just slammed his car into the crowd of protesters. This was Foster standing his ground, but he got shot. I don't know. You tell me what's going on. Now, Texas stand your ground also includes the right to stand the other person's ground if you drive your car onto it first. The case caught the attention of influential conservative voices like former Fox News host Tucker Carlson and Texas GOP chair Matt Rinaldi, who both pressured Abbott to pardon Perry, saying he acted in self-defense in the face of dangerous protests, which he drove his car into. Abbott rarely issues pardons, it is said here, which the board must recommend before the governor can act. Abbott granted 3 pardons in 2023, 2 pardons in 2022, and 8 in 2021, most for lower-level offenses. Shortly after Perry's conviction, unsealed court documents revealed that he had made a slew of racist, threatening comments about protesters in text messages and social media posts. Days after George Floyd's murder by a Minneapolis police officer prompted nationwide protests, Perry sent a text message saying, I might go to Dallas to shoot looters. Both Perry and Foster are white. It happens. Perry, a U.S. Army sergeant, also sent racist and anti-Muslim messages before and after Floyd's death. In April of 2020, he sent a meme which included a photo of a woman holding her child's head underwater in the bath with the text, when your daughter's first crush is a little Negro boy, according to the state's filing. That's something he just felt free to share on social media. Your daughter's first crush is a little Negro boy? Negro. Wow. Hold the kid's head under the water in the bath. Drown her. Oh, boy. During the trial, several colleagues in the Army testified that Perry treated everyone fairly, regardless of race. His lawyers called Perry's social media posts and messages barracks humor, locker room talk. Oh, is it not about sexual assault? Oh, okay. Well, in that case, it's just barracks humor, not locker room humor. This pardon not only undermines the justice system, but also sends a chilling message that politically motivated violence is acceptable. This decision is a slap in the face of the Foster family, the Black Lives Matter movement, and to all who believe in justice and equality, said Representative Ron Reynolds, Democrat of Missouri City, there in Texas, Missouri City, Texas, said in a statement. Reynolds serves as the chair of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. The court documents also revealed that Perry sent inappropriate messages to someone who claimed to be 16 years old, so he's a real upstanding citizen, through Kick Messenger, a communication platform that has been used to share child pornography. I mean, I guess all platforms have probably been used for that. I don't know if there's any real connection to that or not for Perry, but on the other hand, my goodness, Perry apparently sent the message, quote, also promise me no nudes until you are old enough to be of age, to this in the same month that he had shot and killed Foster, just sort of trying to cover himself. I mean, it's good. Yes, don't ask for nudes from somebody you believe to be underage, but don't be talking about them at all with anybody you think to be underage, and don't think that you're being clever by, well, just wait until you're old enough, and then please send me the nudes at that point. Still gross. Before signing off, Perry wrote, I am going to bed. Come up with a reason why I should be your boyfriend before I wake up. This is a quality individual. In his proclamation, Abbott took aim at Garza's handling of the case and accused the district attorney of misusing his office, which is, to prosecute people who shoot others to death. He said Garza directed the lead detective investigating the case to withhold exculpatory evidence from the grand jury. Oh, really? Abbott said that Garza prioritized reducing access to guns that citizens may use to lawfully defend themselves instead of protecting Perry's right to self-defense, which was really questionable in this case. In March, Travis County voters handed Garza an easy victory in the Democratic primary after he ran on a progressive platform to investigate more sexual assault cases, to prosecute police misconduct, and to attempt to divert more people from jail. He's expected to be reelected in November. So, there's a lot of that going around as well. And read in parallel with what's happening in Israel, especially if you read the longer, wider, more detailed article, it might give you some pause. Okay, let's see. We got one more break coming up here in a minute or so. Anything we can squeeze in? Oh, yes, let's do this short bit. Procedural news. I just thought this was kind of interesting and fun. From the reporting outside of the farting guy's trial up in New York, the story of the Republicans flocking to New York to pay tribute, essentially, during the trial, left us with an unusual situation. It says here, Republicans flock to Trump's trial, risking control of the House floor. I saw somebody musing about this during the day yesterday, and I guess this must be a real point. On Thursday, an entourage of about 20 accompanied the former president to court. Among them were many lawmakers, and guess what? Annie Carney reporting this from D.C., though. The House was in session at the Capitol on Thursday, but thanks to the latest procession of Republicans reporting for duty in front of a Manhattan criminal courthouse to show support for former President Donald J. Trump at his trial, the party risked ceding its control of the floor. Almost a dozen House Republicans showed up at the courthouse on Thursday, including hard-right rabble-rousers like Representatives Matt Gaetz of Florida, Anna Paulina Luna of Florida, Lauren Boebert of Colorado, and Bob Good of Virginia. They said they were there to speak on behalf of Mr. Trump because a gag order had barred him from speaking himself, with good reason. We are here of our own volition, all dressed in uniform for some reason, because there are things we can say that President Trump is unjustly not allowed to say. Mr. Gaetz said at a news conference outside the courthouse, he said the former president was on trial for a, quote, made-up crime that he called the Mr. Potato Head of crimes, which is actually quite dumb, composed of unrelated elements awkwardly stuck together. Mr. Good said the trial was an example of Democrats trying to rig the presidential election against Mr. Trump. After Ms. Luna sat in the courtroom, she came out to report that, quote, the president is doing well, he's in good spirits. It sounds like he got shot, which would have been a better thing. Republicans control the House by such a slim margin You know that margin. That just 2 defections can sink legislation if all members are present and voting, and just a few absences can erase their majority altogether. The show of support for Mr. Trump from such a large group of members meant that for much of Thursday, the GOP may have handed the floor over to Democrats, leaving themselves exposed. Not that anybody took advantage of it. House Republicans had a vote scheduled for Thursday afternoon to rebuke President Biden. Of course, what else would they possibly be doing with their time? For his decision to pause an arms shipment to Israel and compel his administration to quickly deliver those weapons. The bill was designed to divide Democrats and embarrass Mr. Biden and had no chance of passing the Senate or becoming law. But with so many Republicans off campus demonstrating their fealty to Mr. Trump, they left open the possibility that the party's own messaging bill could be defeated. That's pretty funny. And, well, let's see if we can figure out what happened here. Democratic leaders in the House had advised their members to vote no, of course, calling the measure another partisan stunt by extreme MAGA Republicans who were determined to hurt President Biden politically. The group that showed up in Manhattan on Thursday was composed of lawmakers who rarely shy from disrupting legislative business in the Capitol or embarrassing the party on the House floor. It included many of the same rebels from the House Freedom Caucus who have frozen the chamber for days on end, voting down their own party's rules as an act of protest.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. One last segment here to close out the week. I'll just finish up this piece discussing the number of Republicans who were spending their time paying fealty to Trump outside the courtroom rather than actually doing their jobs in Washington, D.C. And Democrats could have, but did not. But now perhaps they realize it, and they should make them pay for it. Make them keep a majority in D.C. At a minimum, it will keep the numbers of, essentially demonstrators down up in the New York court, outside the New York courtroom. If fewer Republicans are able to show up to pay fealty to Trump, so much the better, in my view. Anyway, we left off in the middle of this piece here where it's noted now that Paul Kane, a reporter for the Washington Post, posted on social media that the large number of Republican absences could allow Democrats to, quote, pull some hijinks, such as calling a motion to adjourn and shutting down the chamber altogether. It's one of the, least worrisome hijinks that they could pull. But, a doable thing anyway. House Democrats have worked to present themselves to voters as the adults in the room dedicated to governing. And as of midday on Thursday, no such stunt has been pulled, nor were there any plans for one. But Mr. Kane's post was making the rounds among Democratic staff aides who admitted the idea was tempting. Top congressional Republicans for days have been making the pilgrimage to Trump's criminal trial. J.D. Vance, Senator of Ohio, of course, and potential Trump running mate, was the first to debut the new audition strategy. Other lawmakers who want to tie themselves to Trump for their own political survival or advancement have followed. Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, was there on Tuesday. Senator Tommy Tuberville, Republican of Alabama, made an appearance on Monday. On Thursday, top Republicans had already changed at least one element of the House schedule to accommodate the GOP field trip. The Oversight Committee postponed a meeting scheduled for Thursday morning to hold a vote on holding Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, in contempt of Congress and rescheduled it for 8 p.m. with 5 of the panel's members, Andy Biggs of Arizona, Michael Cloud of Texas, Mike Waltz of Florida, Lauren Boebert, and Anna Paulina Luna, all in Manhattan. The GOP had to delay the vote until they had enough members back in Washington to prevail. So, jeopardizing their control of the House of Representatives in order to pull this stunt in support of Trump. It's, par for the course for them, but still rather astonishing. By the way, they did manage to get that vote through the House eventually and passed their bill or resolution. What is it? I don't know. I got a report on it here from The Hill, just so we can get the terminology right. House passes GOP bill to undo Biden's weapons freeze to Israel. It is reported here. So they managed to delay things long enough so that they could get a majority back on the floor. And they may even have had some Democratic support in doing it. So, wasn't the best candidate for pulling some real hijinks on them. But, it's interesting. Something to keep an eye on. And it's always good news when there's procedural plotting going on and discussion of it on social media, and it gets into the hands of the Democratic aides on Capitol Hill and they start mulling it over. I like the idea. Anyway, plenty more where that came from, of course, but I'll park that Hill article there just so you all can refer back to it if you want to. Let's see. There's also more follow-up on something we mentioned yesterday with Greg. The agreement, at least temporarily, from the Trump camp to a debate schedule. And lots of people, pretty quickly jumped on that news story to remind everybody and remind themselves and everybody else that Trump would by no means be bound by any of this and would, in fact, probably attempt to weasel out of it as soon as possible. And they did. Let's see. The New Republic has this story here. Let's see if we can read through it relatively quickly. Pathetic Trump. I like the headline. Pathetic Trump already trying to weasel out of debating Biden. Let's see. Where's the byline on this thing? They put it in a different... Hafiz Rashid for the New Republic. After agreeing to 2 debates with Biden, Donald Trump seems to be trying to set up an excuse to escape the whole thing. And like I said, probably not a surprise to most people. Here's the story part of it. After Joe Biden and Republican presidential nominee Trump on Wednesday morning agreed to 2 debates in June and September, Trump suddenly began trying to push a 3rd debate, all on his own. Please let this truth, on Truth Social, serve to represent that I hereby accept. I love when he hereby does stuff. Hereby accept debating crooked Joe Biden on Fox News. The date will be Wednesday, October 2nd. The hosts will be Bret Baier and Martha McCallum, Trump wrote in a Truth Social post on Wednesday afternoon. That, of course, I guess, had not been discussed, negotiated, much less agreed to or anything. But Trump announcing the whole thing, and now he can, I guess somebody probably advised him, why not announce one being moderated by conservative hosts and on a date of your choosing. And when Biden says, what? Nobody ever mentioned any of that. No, I don't agree to that. Aha, trying to back out of the debate, huh? I'm sure that's what's up here. Trump's campaign had announced that it had accepted an invitation from CNN to debate Biden on June 27th, as well as a second invite for a debate moderated by ABC on September 10th. Biden, who had previously accepted an invitation from CNN, also agreed to take part in ABC News' debate as well. But Trump's post seems to indicate that the former president is trying to alter the agreement on his own. Biden's campaign accused him of playing games. Okay. Is there more that we need to know about it? It's a short piece, but that really about sums it up. And I assume that in addition to naming his own terms on a 3rd debate, he will come up with some sort of excuse why it's not right to participate in the other debates to which he actually agreed. And I think I had seen yesterday the groundwork being laid for that as well. You know, Republicans already saying, well, we don't like what do we have now? The Commission for Presidential Debates, as opposed to, we were just talking about this yesterday, where Greg was saying they somehow supplanted the League of Women Voters, mostly, I think, over Republican objections, saying, oh, no, the League of Women Voters is too partisan. So now they formulated this other thing, the Commission on Presidential Debates, and now they think that's too left-leaning, and so we're not going to agree to debates from them, and I don't know, all sorts of nonsense about we don't love this violation of norms. Everyone loves their norms all of a sudden, and so they shouldn't agree to these debates after all. All right, well, no, but that's what we have going on. All right, let's see other stories that need to be put on the record. There are a lot. Which ones shall we include? How about an international story? We usually would leave the international news to Justice Putnam on his West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next, of course, after this program here on Netroots Radio. But I don't know. This one sort of grabbed my eye, and I thought, I don't know what to make of it and what connection we can make to international affairs in general. But I don't know, just adding to the increasing feeling of things falling apart and people throwing off the rule of law all over the place, sometimes for good reason, sometimes for bad. This one not likely to make a big splash in the United States, but being reported by The Guardian because, I don't know, Britain and Britons traditionally, for all the years of their empire, though it's gone now, love keeping an eye on the far-flung places in the world, and especially if they can point to the collapse of remnants of someone else's empire as well. New Caledonia. Are you aware of what it is or where it is? I only became aware of it because they briefly made appearances at the top of the lists of, people who had or people who were reporting bad numbers in the COVID pandemic, but we're only one of a few places still reporting numbers at the time anyway. And they cropped up on the top 10 list, and I said, good opportunity. What is New Caledonia? Where is it? It is a French Pacific territory, apparently lying between Australia and Fiji, which, if you know your geography, you got some idea where it is. Otherwise, look on the map. I know where Australia is. Where exactly is Fiji? Well, on your way there, you'll pass over New Caledonia. New Caledonia engulfed in riots, apparently. Parts of the territory are out of state control, according to a French representative. Days of unrest in the Pacific territory, sparked by a plan to change voting rules. Not popular anywhere. Have left 5 dead. Julian Mazzoni is reporting for the Guardian from out of the capital of New Caledonia, which, am I going to pronounce this correctly or not? Noumea, perhaps? N-O-U-M-E, accented A. N-O-U-M-E-A. Noumea is my best guess at that. We should all brush up on our New Caledonian facts. Tensions remained high in Noumea, the capital of New Caledonia, on Friday. It was Friday there yesterday. That's the way it is in the Pacific. After days of riots, as the French government's representative, it's still a French territory, French government's representative said that areas of the Pacific territory have escaped state control. Louis Lefranc. Shall we try and give it some sort of French pronunciation here? And by the way, it's not a joke. He's Lefranc. Well, that makes some sense. Louis Lefranc, High Commissioner of the Republic in New Caledonia, the Commissioner of the Republic of France in New Caledonia, I believe, right, announced new security deployments. So how many French troops does it take to control a place like the capital of New Caledonia? The number of police and gendarmes on the island will rise to 2,700 from 1,700 by Friday evening. So they're all flying in. They're going to have an extra 1,000 troops on hand, almost 300. Reinforcements will be arriving to control the areas that have escaped us in recent days. Where control is no longer assured, Lefranc told reporters at a briefing. One person suspected of homicide surrendered to the authorities, he said, after rioting began on Monday, leaving 5 dead and resulting in hundreds of arrests. Thursday night was relatively calm, he said. However, there were still points of confrontation and concern in Noumea. Lefranc said operations to supply food and medicine to the public would begin with teams, including specialists in mine clearing, removing road barricades that have been booby-trapped by activists. So, something serious is happening here. The New Caledonia government said in a statement on Friday the island has stocks of food for 2 months, and the problem is distribution. Opposition to a French plan to impose new voting rules spiraled into deadly violence in the archipelago between Australia and Fiji, which is one of several territories around the globe that remain a part of France. At a press briefing on Monday morning, Lefranc said several hundred rioters remained in the districts of Camere. There's like 2 accent marks in this one, Kamere, Camere, Montraval, and Vallée du Tir, where the situation is still very difficult. These are areas where there are several hundred rioters who are waiting to make contact with the police. That's a weird way of putting it, Lefranc said. In the working class districts of Noumea, which have a high population of indigenous Kanak residents, K-N-A-K, Kanak, I'm not certain where the emphasis falls there, buildings were burned and wrecked vehicles remained in the middle of the road. The official death toll stood at 5, with 2 police officers killed. The 3 other victims were Kanak, and images of their corpses circulating on social networks have increased the anger of Kanak youth. Lefranc said on Friday authorities would seek to restore access to hospitals. The first priority is unblock all the routes so that carers can get there. Caregivers, we would say. The same goes for Caledonians who need to be taken care of, he said. The Field Action Coordination Cell, the group which organized the protest on Monday against the proposed constitutional reform, blamed the French government for the violence. Faced with the state's stubborn determination to impose a change on the Constitution, we denounce its irresponsibility and hold it responsible for the loss of human life, the atrocities, and the destruction of the country's economic fabric, it said in a statement. Atrocities, oh my. No word on that so far, but that's just because we haven't known about this or followed it. I wonder what's going on. Prime Minister Gabriel Attal earlier said about 1,000 extra security forces would be sent to New Caledonia, adding to the 1,700 already present, while authorities would push for the harshest penalties for rioters and looters. Interior Minister Gerald Darmanin said reinforcements had started arriving on Thursday. Troops had been called in to secure New Caledonia's international airport, which has been closed to commercial flights and main ports. TikTok has been banned because it was being used by protesters, according to authorities. Sounds backwards and Banana Republic-ish, doesn't it? But, we're sort of contemplating that here in this country. The social media company called the decision regrettable in a statement and said that no request or question, no demand to withdraw content had been made by local authorities or the French government. So what are you talking about? As part of the state of emergency, about 200 and an estimated 5,000 rioters have been detained, French authorities said. Security forces placed 5 suspected independence activists accused of organizing violence under house arrest, according to authorities. It added that people have been ambushing law enforcement officers with sustained fire from hunting rifles. 64 of the injured are police and security forces. Onlookers wandered around burnt-out shops, looted shelves, and discarded packaging. We always have that problem. Between 80 and 90% of the grocery distribution network in Noumea, from shops to warehouses and wholesalers, have been wiped out, Chamber of Commerce and Industry President David Goyen said. The CCI has said about 200 million euros worth of damage has been carried out. Nicole George, an Australian professor visiting Noumea, told AFP she had seen residents armed with improvised weapons manning barricades. It's a very tense situation. People are on edge. They're frightened and they're tired, she said. While it has, on occasions, rejected independence in referendums, the cause retains strong support among the Kanak people whose ancestors lived on the islands for thousands of years, colonized by France. From the second half of the 19th century, New Caledonia has special status, unlike the country's other overseas territories. French lawmakers on Tuesday pushed forward plans to allow outsiders who moved to New Caledonia in the last 10 years to vote in the territory's elections, which actually sounds like maybe kind of a good idea. Pro-independence forces, though, say that would dilute the vote of Kanaks, who make up about 40% of the population. Okay, I can see that too. A group of independence movements in French territories around the world, convened by Azerbaijan, issued statements about the riots on Tuesday and Thursday, prompting Darmanin, I remember the French official, to accuse Baku in Azerbaijan, the capital of Azerbaijan, of interference. Oh boy. Baku swiftly rejected the allegation as baseless. Voting reform must still be approved by a joint sitting of both houses of the French parliament. President Emmanuel Macron has said French lawmakers will adopt the constitutional change by the end of June, unless New Caledonia's opposing sides can strike a new deal. But a video conference between Macron and New Caledonian lawmakers planned for Thursday was canceled as the different players did not want to speak to one another, his office said. So, still up in the air. Not sure how this resolves itself. And, I don't know. Not sure whether we'll hear when it does either, because not a lot of news normally coming out of New Caledonia. But, I don't know. Chaos everywhere. And just an interesting example of, but they're moving to change the voting rules. That sounds like a terrible imposition. But they're moving to change the voting rules to allow people who have arrived there and in the last 10 years and are making their lives there to participate in the democracy there. That sounds like a good thing. But it's diluting the voting rights of the indigenous population. Well, that sounds like a bad thing. It's very difficult to know. But, nuance surrounds even violence everywhere. Just a good reminder. We're not all alone in that. And, of course, it's not just the parallels between activities and outcomes in the United States and Israel are not the only parallels that apply. There are plenty and too many of them. All right. We got room for another story or two. What makes the most interesting and impactful addition to all of this? Gosh, I don't know. Why don't we spend some time on a story I mentioned yesterday, and I think included in the roundup, and also comes from the Texas Tribune, by the way, and which Justice, I think, gave some time to yesterday, although I don't know what article he had on hand, but it sounded like he had a different report on it. But the Texas Tribune has done some in-depth work on the GOP Texas school board member who campaigned against schools indoctrinating kids. You know, that's the big craze around the country for Republicans. Then she read the curriculum and found out she was completely wrong. It's an interesting story. And what did she do about it? Courtney Gore, a Granbury ISD, that's Independent School District, board member, has disavowed the far-right platform that she campaigned on. Her defiance has brought her backlash. Another of the interesting nuances about finding out that you are completely wrong and telling the truth, and then or taking some brave stance for resolution of conflict or bringing peace, perhaps even to the Middle East in some form or another, and then getting yourself threatened, or in the case of Israel, killed for it. It's just one of another set of interesting and worrisome parallels. Jeremy Schwartz for the Texas Tribune and ProPublica has this version of the story. Weeks after winning a school board seat in her deeply red Texas county, Courtney Gore immersed herself in the district's curriculum, spending her nights and weekends poring over hundreds of pages of lesson plans that she had fanned out on her coffee table in her living room and even across her bed. She was searching for evidence of the sweeping national movement she had warned on the campaign trail was indoctrinating school children. Gore, the co-host of a far-right online talk show, had promised that she would be a strong Republican voice on the nonpartisan school board. Great. Citing small-town conservative Christian values. She pledged to inspect educational materials for inappropriate messages about sexuality and race and remove them from every campus in the 7,700-student Granbury ISD, an hour southwest of Fort Worth. Over the years, our American education system has been hijacked by leftists looking to indoctrinate our kids into the progressive way of thinking. And yes, they've tried to do this in Granbury ISD, she wrote in a September 2021 Facebook post 2 months before the election. I cannot sit by and watch their twisted worldview infiltrate Granbury ISD. It makes this strident language seem so dumb. But at least you know there's a better outcome at the end of the rainbow here, although it might not be so great for her. But after taking office and examining hundreds of pages of curriculum, you know, what you're supposed to do in a normal world, Gore was shocked by what she found and didn't find. The pervasive indoctrination she had railed against simply did not exist. Now, we told you this, but you had to find it out for yourself, I'm sure. Children were not being sexualized, and she could find no examples of critical race theory. Which, you know, they go on to explain, but we know what it is. She'd examined curriculum related to social emotional learning, which had come under attack by Christian conservatives who say it encourages children to question gender roles and prioritizes feelings over biblical teachings. Where are we having problems with biblical teachings? Oh, yes, right, Israel. Instead, Gore found the materials taught children how to be a good friend, a good human. It might even be considered almost compatible with Christian values. Gore rushed to share the news with hardliners who had encouraged her to run for the seat. She expected them to be as relieved and as excited as she had been. Oh, poor true believer. But she said they were indifferent, even dismissive, because it didn't fit the narrative that they were trying to push. Look, this is getting you elected. It's getting people like you elected. Why don't you just let us control your minds and do what we want to do? So, in the spring of 2022, Gore went public with a series of Facebook posts. She told residents that her backers were using divisive rhetoric to manipulate the community's emotions. They were interested not in improving public education, but rather in sowing distrust, Gore said. I'm over the political agenda, hypocrisy, BS, Gore wrote. I took part in it myself. I refuse to participate in it any longer. It is not serving our party. We have to do better. Gore's open defiance of far-right GOP orthodoxy represents an unusual sign of independence in a state and in a party that experts say increasingly punishes those deemed disloyal. It particularly stands out at a time when Republican leaders are publicly attacking elected officials who do not support direct funding to private schools. It's a rare event to see this kind of political leap, especially in a world that's so polarized, said University of Houston political scientist Brandon Rottinghouse. Matrix glitch for you. Rottinghouse? All right. Well, anyway, you rarely see these kinds of changes because the people who are vetted to run tend to be true believers. They tend not to be people who are necessarily thinking about the holistic problem. The funny thing is that she was a true believer in it after all and found that her belief was questioned and she valued truth at some point. She wasn't a true believer in the narrative. She was a believer in what's true. Weird, huh? With the presence of Donald Trump, fealty to cause has amplified, so this kind of action is much more meaningful and much more visible than it was a decade ago, Rottinghouse said about Gore. In March, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, the guy who just did the pardon, a Republican, of course, was victorious in unseating 5 lawmakers in his own party and forcing another 3 into runoff elections after they voted against voucher legislation that would have allowed the use of public dollars for students to attend private and religious schools. His efforts sent a message to those who did not unflinchingly support his priorities. They would face grave political repercussions. Gore was a part of a similar movement of hardliners who pushed out the Republican Hood County Elections Administrator in 2021 after determining that she was not conservative enough for the nonpartisan position. Now Gore and the other disillusioned local Republicans have formed a group pushing against an ultra-right faction of the party that it says has become obsessed with administering purity tests and stoking divisive politics. Again, I encourage you to spend a good part of your weekend reading that New York Times Magazine article about how extremists took over Israel and see if it's not a warning sign for you. A little bit more. The former teacher and mother of four was influenced by such politics when she decided to run for office. She was motivated to seek a school board seat after a steady stream of reports from the right-wing media she consumed, and her social media feeds pointed to what she saw as inappropriate teachings in public schools. She, too, had been outraged by school mask mandates and vaccine requirements during the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic. But Gore said she feels that she was unwittingly part of a statewide, nationwide, international, really, effort to weaken local support of public schools and lay the groundwork for a voucher system, but really undermining the authority of institutions everywhere, I would say, to make it a broader story, as it deserves to be. And she said that unless she and others sound the alarm, residents won't realize what is happening until it is too late. I feel like if I don't speak out, then I'm complicit, Gore says. I refuse to be complicit in something that's going to hurt children. Well, that's nice. Because of that outspokenness, Gore is facing a backlash from the same people who supported her race. I thought they were into kids too, but maybe in a different way. Anyway, she has been threatened at raucous school board meetings and shunned by people she once considered friends. School marshals, they have them, escort her and her fellow board members to their cars to ensure no one accosts them. When things get particularly heated, a fellow trustee follows her in his car to make sure she gets home safely. Well, it's quite a story. It's probably worth your time in the weekend to read through it as well. Maybe for something more encouraging to lift your spirits and redeem your belief in humanity after you spend your time on the weekend on the New York Times Magazine article. Okay, lots that we didn't get to today. It was a busy Friday and a busy week, and we'll get back to you on Monday with yet more. And if you want even more to think about, or maybe you just want someone to help guide you through with thinking of his own, Justice Putnam takes over the mic next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
What's happening around the country according to Justice today? Merrick Garland punched back at House Republicans over their unfounded attacks on the U.S. Justice Department. The Nevada Supreme Court denied an appeal of a conservative election fraud activist who sought to oust county elections officials. And Georgia wants a judge rather than a jury to decide whether it violated U.S. antitrust laws. Stay tuned. See you next week.